Hello and welcome to episode 173 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're catching back up with the Call of Duty League after a week and a half or so away. But we are back and we are ready to talk about some massive roster changes that have happened in the CDL over the past week or so. And we also have some matches that we will catch up on. But those roster changes are probably the biggest point, probably going to be most of this show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Bit of a funky schedule for us lately, so apologize for that. But we should be back on track once we get through this little jumbo episode here, combining the weekend recap and the upcoming week's predictions and all the roster mania talk. Then we should be good to go after that. At least I think for at least the foreseeable future. But yeah, good to be back. Like Preston said, definitely some interesting stuff to talk about and ready to jump right in.
So the biggest piece of news actually happened yesterday afternoon. OpTic Texas, and we will certainly get to this, but after beating the Vancouver Surge, sweeping the Surge in their CDL Week 1 Major 4 qualifying match, they decided to execute a roster change, something that we had been talking about since and even before Major 3, whether OpTic would go ahead and change their roster again. They elected to not do that before their first match of the qualifiers. Instead, they wait until yesterday, May 6th, to announce the signing of Mercules, the much talked about rookie who came in for Beans with the Toronto Ultra at Major 3. He had a breakout performance, and we discussed it quite at length about where he could go if Toronto is going to keep him in place of Beans, if another team, namely Cloud9 New York or OpTic Texas, would have any interest in him. But when we went into those matches and he wasn't on a roster, there were rumors that he was going to stay with Toronto as a substitute and just kind of float around there. I was pretty dejected by that. But now that is not the case, obviously, and he is replacing Skyz in the OpTic Texas starting roster. So your initial reaction, Bink, to Mercules getting his shot with OpTic?
Yeah, I mean, this is we haven't done a show in a couple, a little over a week now, so I can't remember exactly what we said on the last episode, but the general gist of it should have been uh, we were talking about Mercules and where he could go and all that stuff, and the potential around whether Toronto would keep him if they were unsure of visas of Bean's visa issues. Or if they would allow him to go to another team or sign with another team or maybe a buyout, whatever the case may be. And after the first week, I really, it felt like he was going to be on the outside looking in. Um, we were just talking a couple minutes ago, there was potential reports of him, of Mercules potentially going to Cloud9 before the Major 4 Week 1 qualifiers began, and those talks apparently fell through, reportedly, allegedly, whatever you want to say. Um, and it sounded like from those rumblings that Toronto was planning to keep him on the bench, which from a pure, like, totally objective standpoint, I wouldn't hate the move from Toronto. I would hate it for the individual and Mercules himself, just because he really popped off at Major 3, and I thought he showed he belonged in the CDL given how well he performed on such short notice and the situation and all that. Um, but from an organization standpoint, like, if you're unsure about the visa situation for Beans for Major 4 and the rest of the season, yeah, it's going to be hard to strike gold twice with finding a substitute if you let Mercules go and then something pops up with Beans or any of the other players for that matter. Um, so I understood it from that perspective. And then we go into the first week of the qualifiers. OpTic plays Vancouver, a match. Vancouver coming off a second place finish. Um, at the major, and Shotzi coming off of going on stream saying that the team wasn't making changes. OpTic beats Vancouver 3-0, as you said, completely unexpected, I think, by just about everybody. And then they announced the change yesterday, like you said. So that's really, I believe, I can't remember if it was when we were talking about OpTic this past time, but I know I said it, especially when we were talking about Rex with Carolina and stuff. It's just the mid qualifier roster change doesn't make as much sense to me. No. As doing it before the qualifier starts, so you can give that roster as many reps and opportunities to play together before the actual lands and whatnot. Mm-hmm. In this case, it sounds like there were some clips from Hex and even Shotzi on stream again saying that, there might have been some stuff behind the scenes, presumably, allegedly involving contract talks and stuff like that may have slowed down this process for Mercules regardless of what team he ended up going to. So I'm not gonna, hold that against OpTic or anything, but for making the roster change mid qualifier after beating Vancouver, definitely weird timing, all things considered. But if it seems like from what the clips of Hex and everything, it seemed like he was pushing for them to make this move, and it just wasn't able to get done before the qualifiers. So, obviously it sounds like there was talks and whatnot going in, and it's just the timeline we're in, and now Mercules is on OpTic. Everyone seemingly making parallels, comparisons to the Ghosty situation, a little bit different just because, Mercules got his shot at one LAN event in the CDL technically beforehand, but nonetheless, it's just a crazy story. We went over it in depth when we were breaking down Major 3 and whatnot. Like, I saw people talking on Twitter that Mercules literally wasn't even playing Respawn a year ago. I think Mock, one of the Challenger players, I saw a tweet of him saying like something like, a year ago Mercules didn't even know that spawns change when the hard point changes locations, and now he's on OpTic. So I thought that, that's it. Just in the grand scheme of things, it's an awesome opportunity for Mercules. Really excited for him and excited that he is going to be competing in the CDL for arguably the rest of the season at the minimum, and he's just got to make the most of this opportunity. I think from a role perspective, which seemingly is what a lot of the community is focused on with this move, he just he was doing it all with whether it was an AR or a sub in his hands at Major 3. And really, I do think, I know I talked about it when we were talking about Gentlemates earlier this year. There were times where like Priesta and Skyz had the sub in their hands on like maps like Skyline and stuff. And I thought that they were serviceable and they did okay at times. But really, in a small sample size, Mercules showed that he can be a true flex player. And when I think of Skyz, I do think of Skyz more as a traditional main AR than a flex. And maybe this is just, an increase in speed and a little change of pace that OpTic needs to really make a push here for these biggest tournaments of the year. So overall, I am surprised that this is thinking about the last couple of weeks in totality now. I am surprised this is how it all went down. If you told me before the qualifiers or right after the major OpTic was going for Mercules, I don't think I would have been as surprised. It would have made a ton of sense to me then. I like the fit, I like the player, excited for him, and hoping for his sake he takes takes advantage of this opportunity and runs away with it.
One of your final points was maybe this will change the trajectory of OpTic and help them for this season. In reality, it's probably, I can't say probably not, or I guess based on odds, probably not going to have a gigantic effect in their championship aspirations this season. It certainly could help, but I still think that they have a lot of ground to make up with Atlanta FaZe and LAT Those are the top two, and I don't think that OpTic will catch them by the end of the season, which is 3 to 6 weeks away when champs happens. But I think this move is a long-term play, really. I would imagine Mercules is signed past just this season, and I would imagine like if he's like he had probably quite a bit of interest from CDL teams. If I were his representation, I would certainly at least try to get another year, just simply because if he performs poorly, let's say, over these next 3 to 4 weeks, and his stock plummets, like it might have been just at an all-time high, not to jinx him or anything, but let's just be realistic. Some people have that kind of breakout party and then are never really able to capture it, or at least in the short term that we have over the final few weeks of the season, maybe he's not able to capture it again. That would definitely decrease his value, and then he goes into this offseason with the uncertainty of just general roster mania in the CDL and his stock not being nearly as high. I would certainly hope that his representation held out for at least next season, just so he has some kind of security if he doesn't perform well down the stretch.
I mean, the only thing I'll say to that is, do we even know for sure if he has any representation or anything? That was the thing we were talking about.
That's true. Yeah.
Either 2 episodes or last episodes ago. Like we weren't even sure. Like I'm sure legally, he had to have signed some form of a contract with Toronto for the before Major 3. But we were saying we didn't know. Like I think you said like a 10-day or a 2-week contract, whatever the minimum was. Like it was probably, given the rush and urgency of the situation, it was probably something that was like, hey, you just got to sign this piece of paper so you can legally go on stage. And he might have just signed it without even reading it, to be honest. That's obviously all speculation. But like I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have an agent of any kind, just because he is 18, 19, I believe. Like I said, just started playing competitive. Varian at least was playing S&D before this, so this is like legit his first full season as even like an actual amateur or challengers player, let alone making it into the CDL. But yeah, that's we won't know for sure unless we see some tweet, like, maybe down the road we see something like Mercules tweet, free agent hit up, X agent or contact X email for future free agent talks or whatever. That's probably the only chance we have of ever finding an answer to that.
Yeah, and either way, I would think just in general this move is more looking toward the future, because it feels like a lot to ask of any player, but especially one that has played precisely one LAN event in the CDL, to come save your franchise, to lead you to the promised land and lead you to be a top 4 team like you were expected to be this entire season. That seems like it's a lot to ask of Mercules. But I do think that it is a good move. Obviously, I believe that from the get-go that picking up Skyz was a mistake or a stopgap solution. It did not seem like a very logical, forward-thinking move on OpTic Texas's part. And now they've kind of, they found themselves in a better position, in my opinion, than they were even a week ago or a month ago. That being said, the timing of this, like you mentioned, is incredible. Like the fact that, OpTic has really not been able to beat any of these top teams for months. They have been shut out by, Atlanta, LAT, Toronto, Vancouver. Most of those teams have just completely wiped them, and it hasn't been particularly close in a lot of those scenarios. And now you get to this point where OpTic 3-0s Vancouver, and then they're like, yeah, this is the time to make a roster change. It just seems very weird. If I'm just using my brain, it does feel like it's what you said and what Hex kind of alluded to, that the contract negotiations just took a little bit longer than expected. And with this schedule, if there had been a normal week break between the major and the qualifiers, it probably wouldn't have even mattered. He would have been on the team before week 1, but because there was just, the major and then there's a quick turnaround, it just kind of happened this way, which sucks for Skyz. It sucks for the team to kind of get the highest of highs that they've had as a group together and then completely change it. That being said, I still think, regardless of the timing, you have to make the move that is going to better your team or is in the best interest of your team in the long run. It's kind of like, a quarterback who you think is going to be benched and then he has a great game, he leads the team to the win. He's still not the guy. He's still got to get benched. And it might suck to do it right after a big Monday Night Football win, but at the end of the day, you still have to make that decision because you know that he is not going to be your long-term solution. So I see a lot of parallels there with Skyz. I thought this, I don't know if any of this is true, and I don't think that Jacob Hale was saying it was, but I just thought this was an interesting theory. And this was before any contract stuff, I believe, came out. But Jacob Hale, former Dexerto reporter, he said, in hindsight, I wonder if OpTic winning actually helped them make this decision, assuming all goes ahead. Good chance that they stuck with it because ROKKR were pretty close in the standings. Now there's an even bigger gap, and Champs is basically secured, so rocking the boat short term won't hurt as much. Which brings me to my next point, which is the standings. And we talked a lot about the standings, especially in regards to OpTic over the last few weeks, because they're in 8th place. 8th place is the final spot at Champs. Anybody below that is not going to actually even make it to the World Championship event. So OpTic really needed, they didn't need a strong finish to the season. They didn't need a strong final 6 matches or whatever, but they could not go over and really expect to make it to Champs. They could theoretically, but more likely than not, if they got destroyed over these final 4 weeks, they probably weren't going to make it to Champs. The best case scenario is basically what happened this past week. OpTic goes 1-0. They have a huge upset win over Vancouver, who I think both of us were thinking that's an automatic loss for OpTic. I thought OpTic could really go 1-4 in these qualifiers, and that was assuming they lost to Vancouver. So I think they have a good shot to go 2-3, which is, you might not think, oh, that's a lot better. That's another 10 points. And with the lead that they had over the Minnesota ROKKR and C9, I think that could be a really big win for OpTic in the long run. They are now at, they're still in 8th place, but they have 155 CDL points. They have a 40-point lead over both C9 and Minnesota. And Minnesota did not cover themselves in glory either this week, which is pretty much the worst possible scenario for them because, we just talked about OpTic. They get this huge upset win. It's such a surprise to beat Vancouver. Minnesota, you expect them to beat Vegas of all teams. That is, not a gimme because they're not nearly as bad as they were earlier in the season. But to this point, Vegas had only won 1 match this season. So Minnesota really had to win this match to kind of keep pace, to have, they still have a shot, but they have really, I don't know what the odds would be. Like if it was a 20% chance they make Champs before, I would say it's more like a 7% chance now. And them losing in Game 5 to the Vegas Falcons is pretty much the worst case scenario for themselves. It's the best case scenario for OpTic Texas. So I think, OpTic kind of got the best of both worlds. They got this win. They got to feel that sense of victory again and of actually beating a good team. And they got, I think, an upgrade to their roster moving forward. But yeah, that's going to be something I'm looking forward to seeing how Mercules fits in with them. We have not seen OpTic perform well with roster changes, like immediately afterward, especially. They seem to kind of come out a little bit slow, other than Hoot coming into the roster during the Major 1 qualifiers. But that was so long ago. It feels like literally years ago at this point. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. Anything else on OpTic before we move on?
No, I think you made a really good point, and probably something we'll reiterate later in the show when we go through the matches and whatnot. But like you said, optics, the win over Vancouver was huge, and Minnesota having their loss there to Vegas was equally huge for OpTic, and you could make the argument um, that in most people's minds, Minnesota was favored to beat Vegas, and OpTic was favored to lose to Vancouver in this week. So instead of the 40-point gap between eighth and ninth that we have now, you could argue it might have been a 20-point gap in the CDL point standings coming into this week. So that's just a massive difference, all things considered. And obviously, it's another Game 5, Round 11 loss for Minnesota to Vegas, which that just seems to be the story of Minnesota's season. They have this talent and they have the potential, but they just can't close it out in a lot of scenarios, which is unfortunate for those guys there. But yeah, for the Green Wall, all things considered, basically at this point, I feel like you're on your. Is this technically the fifth roster iteration or fourth? Is
Well,
champs?
are you counting Pred as like two different roster iterations, or because it was like Pred came back
Well,
in?
no, because it's the champs roster. So I'm not gonna say Shotzi and Dashy, but
Yeah,
Kenny and Pred, then Kenny and Hook, then
Kenny,
it did go back to
yeah.
Kenny and Pred.
If you
Okay,
count
that's
that
what
as
I was
one,
thinking.
so
Yeah, if you count that as one, so it's the fourth iteration. Because then it goes Pred, Skyz. No, yeah, this
yeah,
is the fifth.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, um, basically just got to put all that in the rearview mirror at this point for OpTic and look ahead, and they've set themselves up good with a very a 3-0 for a one match week in these qualifiers is big regardless of the opponent, but the fact they got a 3 over Vancouver should be huge for them uh, in the standings and map count for the standings in case of tiebreakers and stuff. So all things considered, you technically got off to a strong start in these last set of qualifiers, got a upgrade on roster and on paper, and we got to see what they do from here.
Yeah, so right now there's only 4 matches left for in these qualifiers for Minnesota, OpTic, and Minnesota, OpTic, and C9. Or excuse me, C9 actually has 3 matches left. So they're in a worse position technically because they're on par with Minnesota's point standings, but they have fewer matches to kind of make up the ground. So Minnesota would, certainly more likely than C9 at this point, but I just looked at Minnesota's schedule for the rest of these qualifiers, and other than their next match, they're kind of screwed, it looks like, down the stretch. So it's really going to take, if OpTic has any chance of getting knocked out of that 8th spot, or really anybody gets knocked out of that 8th spot, it would be C9 or Minnesota having kind of a miracle run through Major 4, which has happened, obviously, because we covered it, I think, on the first season of the Ego Chall podcast, the New York Subliners making their run through the final major of that season and making champs despite seemingly having no shot going into that qualifier period. So we'll see what happens with OpTic, what happens with Minnesota and C9 as we move forward. But C9 we have to talk about in a different light as well, because the roster that they entered, or we thought they would enter in to the Major 4 qualifiers, because of it happens. I believe this was like the day after or a few days after we did our podcast. C9 officially announced their roster change going into the Major 4 qualifiers, and that was what they were going to bench both Mack and Attach and replace them with Spart and Capsidal. Something you said before we went on the air was Spark kind of came out of nowhere. His name was not really mentioned in a lot of these reports. Capsidal had kind of been named as a target for C9, even dating back, I believe, into before Major 3 qualifiers. There were reports that they were trialing with Cap, who has previously played for, I believe, Florida and Boston. I don't know if any other team. Spart, his biggest name or greatest name to fame is that LA Gorillas major victory where I believe that Major 2 of 2023. And then they
Yard with the Volk.
Yeah, and then they did absolutely nothing the rest of the way. I believe he signed a
Because they GA'd the Volk.
and then they Spart and Arcides, I believe, signed 3-year deals with LAG, and then the Guard, which is LAG's parent company, decided to go like, hey, we don't want to do this esports thing anymore. I think it's coincidental timing, but I thought it was funny nonetheless. And he's been in Challengers since then. Capsule has been in Challengers since his last CDL stint. And
I did remember, didn't mean to cut you off,
no,
but
you're
there is, it came up on the CDL Wordle thing I was telling you about. Capsule did fill in for like one match or one weekend for LA Thieves for Kenny, I believe in MW2. So been on
okay.
3 teams in the CDL technically.
Yeah, so 3 CDL teams for Cap. But yeah, this is a big roster change. Obviously, when it's half of your team. We've been talking about C9 for most of this season. I've been very down on them, just from the perspective of, this was supposed to be what I expected to be like a top 6 team, somebody competing, to be in the top 4 of some of these majors, depending on how the results go for some of the other top teams, and that has not borne out at all. Like I said, they're tied for 9th place in the CDL standings. They are on the outside looking in regards to champs. They have, if I said that Minnesota has like a 7% chance to make champs, I think C9 probably has like a 4% chance to make champs. It's not great. They have not looked consistent enough throughout the season, and especially online, which has been kind of a big point of contention this year. But they haven't been consistent enough to kind of get those CDL points split after split. Now they're moving forward with Cap and Spart. In week 1 of these qualifiers with them, they went 1-1. C9, and I should mention the roster now is Cap, Spart, Crimp, and Sib. And the first 2 matches were a 3-0 win over the Vegas Falcons, aforementioned, and then a 3-1 loss to the Toronto Ultra. So a match that you expect them to win, even with C9's troubles. You expect them to beat Vegas, and then you expect them to lose to the Toronto Ultra with Beans. So I'm not sure what to make of it. I don't know if there's really anything to make of it in those first 2 matches. But what do you think about Spart and Capsule coming in for Mack and Attach?
Yeah, so that was really, literally I was on my 6-hour drive down to Maryland when the first report dropped of C9 targeting Craze, and that indicated that they were targeting Craze to replace Mac. That was reported by Breaking Point, Ronnie Intel. Shout out those guys. And I was like, I was just thinking, like, on the right, it felt like it was interesting to me. I obviously don't know a ton about Craze, but it was another omit guy, potentially getting a chance in the league. And then I was mostly thinking, like, it seemed like it was, at least based on that preliminary report, that it was just going to be that move, and Attach was still going to be sticking around. Then the day later comes by, the Capsule stuff comes out that they were they're now targeting Capsule, and they were potentially trying to negotiate, they being Cloud9 New York, trying to get Mercules alongside Craze. And when that move fell through, they went to target Cap, and no mention of Spart in either of these reports. And then the day later, May 1st, Cloud9 announces that Attach, S&D coach Tupac, and Mac were being released. So there were questions if it was going to be Craze and Capsule coming into the roster, but then it turned out it's Spart. So that was really the curveball for me. I just, I wasn't expecting Spart to get another opportunity like this. Not that I don't think he's deserving or anything like that. It's just, we've talked about different names throughout this year, and it feels like for the most part, especially in the AR department, that a lot of the names that we've talked about, like Lunars, Fellow, um, even Rex, although Rex's debut hasn't gone smoothly, and I guess Lunar and Fellow haven't either really had you know the best go of it yet, but nonetheless, those feel like the main names that I've heard, at least in the challenger scene this year, at least in the AR department. And yeah, so I'm happy for Spart. I feel like you said, he had that one shining moment with Gorillas back in Vanguard there, and outside of that, he hadn't really had a long stay in the league to show what he's capable of. Now he joins a team where it's like there's really nothing to lose at this point in my eyes. Like he has the opportunity here to uh, showcase his talent and potentially just show the world what he's capable of and get more eyes on him for next season. And end of the day too, we got EWC at the end of the year. So if he's uh, on a CDL team, for the most part, you expect the CDL teams uh, to to place better for the most part than the challengers teams at the World Cup. I think last year, like the Lore Gaming team with our cities and them, who won champs, they were maybe the only team that outplaced a CDL team. I can't remember exactly, but nonetheless, you feel like you put yourself in a good spot here, given this opportunity. And for Capitol and Spart, it's both. It feels like a broken record to say it, but something that I always say when it's guys who have been in the CDL previously and then they get another opportunity. It's that there are other people who have been in this situation where they got a shot in the CDL, then they, you know, don't sign a contract for the next season, get dropped, whatever the case may be, and they're on the outside looking in for the foreseeable future. And that's obviously not what you want to be from those players' perspectives. You don't want that to happen to you. You want to hit the CDL, hit the ground running, and I guess for Neptune's a good example of that. Like he was in the CDL previously, went back down challengers. Now he got picked up this year and probably is a CDL pro for um, at least the foreseeable future, unless for whatever reason next year's game just doesn't fit him for whatever reason. But he's played so well, I don't know if that would even hinder him getting an opportunity. So yeah, like Capsule and Spart, they got a shot here to show what they um, can do, and we'll have to see what they are capable of producing with this Cloud9 roster, which I do think, especially the guys around them in Sib and Kremp, like they have the makings here of a team that could do some damage. It's just, I think it's probably more of a middle of the pack team at this point. Like you,
Yeah.
you can't set the bar really higher than that, but um, Kremp, speaking of Kremp, he was a part of that LA Thieves roster last year that was really in. I don't think they were in the exact same spot as Cloud9, like standings wise, but for lack of a better example, off the top of my head, they were struggling. I just remember last year, like early in the season, they were 0 and whatever in hard point for a significant stretch of like Major 1, Major 2.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the year, LA Thieves have their best placings at um, Champs and EWC, and then all four of those guys on that roster, Ghosty, Joe Deceives, uh, Nasty, and Kremp, all find themselves still in the CDL. Whereas if that LA Thieves team didn't have a strong finish to the end of the season, you could argue like some of those guys might have been
Yeah.
back in challengers as opposed to being in the CDL. So um, really good opportunity here for Capsidol and Spart. Will be interesting to see what they do with it. I will say, um, early impressions. I did think, you know, they played very well in that match against Vegas. I put down in the notes, Cap went 10-5 in a 6-1 search and destroy win on dealership for C9, and he was just, my exact words in the note are just absolutely sprinting at them being Vegas. So that match is a little while ago, so it's not at the top of my memory, but me writing it down definitely stuck out to me, how Capsidal was playing in the search in particular, which is something, since he's been in the CDL even before, he made his debut back in Vanguard. Yeah, because he was one of those guys that was on the Bokage most kills posted for the season. I specifically remember, I don't remember the number, but he definitely broke 50. And it was a crazy map. But he was a guy even before that, like first opportunity that he was known for search before he got his shot in the variant scene, sort of reminiscent of Miracles, or I said Miracles again, Mercules. And yeah, I think Capsule in particular really played well in these opening matches for Cloud9 at least, and we'll have to see what else they're able to do.
Yeah, shout out Blake in the YouTube chat. So keep up the good work. As far as this roster, one thing you mentioned Neptune, and I think we talk about him quite a bit because he's one of the best mid-season roster pickups in recent history. I can't remember a lot of other instances in which a singular player has that big of an impact on a team, as we've seen with Neptune and the Vancouver Surge this season. But Neptune kind of blows up my spot because I have been on the record as not liking the kind of like going back to what is more comfortable, and that is former CDL players, where teams, they are, and this is something that happens in traditional sports too. There are a lot of teams that are reticent or reluctant or really just scared to make a big move, to make a move for the unknown. And Mercules, I would not say is the unknown. He's kind of, he's not entirely known, we should say, because he's only had this one event at this level. But the unknown is someone like Rex. And that's no shot at him because he's been grinding away in challengers for a long time. But the unknown is that they've never been here before and they have to prove that they're worthy to be here. A lot of teams are hesitant to actually go for that. And that is why I have been on the record as saying I don't like these pickups where you go for a player. Like, I didn't like Vegas's pickups mid-season. Like Pred, of course, not gonna hate on Pred. I think that is as great of a mid-season pickup in terms of just overall talent as Vegas could get. But I didn't like, Priesta and Arcides coming in because I don't think of them as like long-term fixtures. I could certainly be wrong. I've been proven wrong before. I didn't like this Carolina roster coming into this season either, and that was all former CDL retreads basically, or guys that have been on multiple teams already other than what was the rookie of the year last year? Why am I blanking on his name with Carolina?
Not Gwen.
Gwen, yeah. I don't know why I just blanked on his name, but everybody, I could think of literally every other player on Carolina, but the one player that actually has not been on multiple teams in the CDL. But yeah, like I was not high on that team coming into this year, and they proved me wrong time and time again. Of course, they can't beat the top teams, but I didn't expect them to beat most of the middle or bottom teams either. So they've definitely overperformed according to my expectations. As for C9, I guess we'll see what happens down the stretch. I don't know if this is nearly enough time to give like a great, if they win out the rest of the way, they come close or even make champs, then certainly you can say this was a complete and total success. But I don't even know what failure would look like with this new look C9 roster, because they have kind of failed before this now. Like if they only win, one or two qualifying matches, they get top 12 or top 8 at Major 4. I can't say that's a failure because they were already doing that before. So we'll see what happens with C9. I'm not, super excited about the move. I would have liked to see what Craze had up his sleeve, I guess. If Mercules was an option, of course, I believe we talked about that just a little bit on the last pod about like if C9 can swing that, then of course that's a great pickup for them. Obviously, I'm not keeping up to date on challengers, so I don't know who is supposed to be getting their shot up next. I know for a long time I was not loudly, but I would say like semi loudly advocating for Mohawk to get his shot. Obviously, that never worked out. But I believe in like players getting their opportunity after competing in challengers and performing at a high level. I think also with this roster change in particular, what is nice about it is that Spart and Capsule have a level of familiarity with each other throughout this season. They haven't played the whole season together in challengers, but they have played. They started the season with each other, and most recently played together in challengers. So at the beginning of the season, it was Cap, Prolute, Spart, and Hook. Obviously, Hook, he was kind of the darling of the challengers scene. Everybody was
Yep.
saying how he should be on a CDL roster. He gets called up to OpTic. I know that RCDs took his spot, Hook's spot in that team. And then Capsule and Spart went their separate ways for a few months, and most recently competed at the Miami Open together with Standy and Brack. They finished third as part of OMIT. I have no problem with these players, performing well in challengers. I'm just not a huge fan of the known quantities, or I think they're, in my opinion, they're known quantities. So I'm not sure exactly how much different is going to be for C9, but now they have the opportunity to prove me wrong moving forward. Anything else on C9 before we move on?
I think we're good.
One thing we should talk about, and this goes back to the OpTic thing, I don't know if you mentioned it, was Hex talking about the possibility of iLLeY coming back to OpTic. I don't know what to even make of this, because Hex says a lot of things. I don't know what to take seriously all the time about what he says, but he said on his stream, I kind of wanted to have Zeo back, which is obviously iLLeY and Shotzi. They were a longtime duo even before they were even eligible to be in the CDL. They were playing S&D. I literally remember watching wagers on BO3, I think it was, and BO4, yeah. And they would get crazy with those wagers. And then obviously they went on in their first season in the CDL to win champs with the Dallas Empire. They were formerly in OpTic Texas together, and iLLeY has been out of the CDL for over a year now, almost a year and a half, I believe. And I would, he's probably not getting back into the CDL this season. We'll see what happens this off season. What did you make of this about just the possibility of iLLeY getting picked up by OpTic to make him return to the CDL?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing for me with this, I do think it is, it's not clear how serious um the conversations were or anything like that. It did, like, it was kind of like, I haven't watched the clip since earlier this afternoon, but I believe Hex said something along the lines of like, bring him in and give the people a show or something like that. And it was kind of like, um, not to say that iLLeY wouldn't be a good player regardless of the past relationships and whatnot, but that it would have been a popular move from many people and many fans of the Hook and
Yeah.
Shotzi iLLeY trio, and even some Greenwall fans as well. Regardless of all that, though, if this was even uh remotely considered, that at least indicates to me that there isn't some, like, secret ban or anything like that for iLLeY, which I feel like is something that has been speculated on um since his incident last season, where people seem to think in the interview he was, potentially
Abusing drugs, yeah.
using Adderall or something to that effect. Yeah. Um nothing was ever really said about it or confirmed by the league. And it's worth mentioning that the other main example of that I can think of is really with John, former champs MVP with Team Envy. There seemed to be a lot of speculation around his um, departure from competitive Call of Duty and his lack of an appearance in the CDL, that he may have been, like, for lack of a better term, shadow banned, or just, banned from being picked up by these teams without it ever being officially announced or anything like that. Um, so long-winded way of saying that if these conversations were actually being considered, that makes it seem like iLLeY is potentially eligible to return to the CDL, which, if that never was in doubt or anything, that's good for him, and he's just got to work his way back up and prove he can, do it again, because he's a world champ. But yeah, so that's really all I had on that, was that it is interesting to know. And I do think if that move was made earlier this season, and you would think the roster would have been Dashy, iLLeY, Pred, and Hook. That certainly, I feel like, depending on the timing of it, if it was after Kenny was really struggling in the online matches and whatnot, I think a lot of Greenwall fans would have gotten behind it. And on that note, there was another clip I saw. I just was reminded of it. It was JP, Karma, and Hex talking on the watch party. I don't remember who posted it, but it was something. I've seen conversations from Karma and tweets and that stuff talking about, like, the league PCs that are used for the CDL, and it was something along the lines of saying, like, it's some people saying it's wild that the PCs haven't been updated in so long or whatever. And Karma said something like, it's been like 8 years because these are the PCs that were used for the Overwatch League. And then they said this was, I believe, on last weekend's, I think it was the day of Game 7 between the Dallas Stars and the Avalanche, because Scump and Methods left the watch party to go to that Game 7, and then I think JP and Karma jumped on. And they said something like that there was some serious issue with Kenny's PC, which allegedly was also the PC that Skyz was using on OpTic. So that could, not gonna, solely say that's why we saw some of the performances we saw from Kenny and Skyz during their time on OpTic, but I definitely think, especially given some of the criticism that those players received while they were playing for OpTic, I definitely think we have to do them justice by at least sharing that there was allegedly potentially something wrong with the PCs that haven't been updated in a long time by the CDL.
When Activision's contract with PlayStation is over, I don't know when that technically ends. It should be pretty soon.
It's got to be, yeah.
It's got to be within the next year or two.
I mean, Activision's owned by Microsoft now.
Yeah,
so.
but I'm assuming they have to honor the contracts that they acquired. But yeah, when that is over with, let's get on Xbox. Let's stop playing around. Like, I understand there are benefits to playing on PC. I completely get that. I think what the best solution is to just let the platforms kind of open up a little bit. Obviously, the anti-cheat needs to get a lot better because that is a major issue on PC. Not so much on Xbox, not so much on PlayStation, but I think if you're just looking at it as like what is best for competitive, then it's to be on console where you don't have to deal with the cheating and the hacking nearly as much as you do on PC. And like, let's just face it, there are so many issues that PCs run into. And of course, Xbox and PlayStation, the consoles, are less powerful. They're more rigid. At the same point, a lot of times they are more reliable on a case-by-case basis or just in general than PCs are in these environments. especially with Call of Duty. Like, it's a little bit different with like League of Legends and CS:GO. It can cause a lot of issues as well, but like those games are more optimized for PC because they are PC games. Where, let's face it, Call of Duty is not very optimized just in general, but certainly they're trying to get everybody. They're trying to get all the consoles and all the PC players, so they're not focusing nearly as much on the PC aspect. And we run into so many of these issues. I thought when uh, the CDL or just Call of Duty esports went to PC in general, I thought that might be a good thing because we could get the timeout, we could get like the recovery tools that some of these other esports have. It didn't pan out like that. We didn't get any of it. So we just got all of the bad stuff with PCs, and we didn't get really any of the good stuff. And I think it has made it worse off for the players by, I think, cost as well, because consoles, even at their most expensive, are generally cheaper than the PCs that you have to be super competitive with some of these players. And then obviously as a spectator, I don't think it is any better. If anything, it's a lot worse because I don't remember having nearly this many stoppages because they're these service error issues, and like their games are crashing every series. Like, that just didn't happen in the past nearly as much. So that's kind of the side. I think we should go to Xbox. Halo is already on Xbox. I don't think they have nearly as many issues. I won't say they don't have issues because I saw people whining about Halo just a few weeks ago on my timeline. But that is an aside. As for iLLeY and kind of his future in the CDL, I mean, it's a hard thing because a lot of it is kind of rumor and just people talking about this one incident that was very publicized. I think that's the worst part about it, is that this wasn't a private thing. This was something that happened on the main CDL broadcast that people can go in right now and look back and see and understand why there was a lot of concern for iLLeY and why he hasn't been back. I think because of that publicity, that has kind of held him back, because he was, one of the better players on that Surge roster at the time. They really needed him, especially in Search and Destroy. And I think he could help certain teams. I don't think, and in this, even in the CDL, I don't think he has ever been like the go-to guy like Shotzi has been at times. Like where I just don't see him as that like 1A superstar that I think people thought he would be, but he can still be a very good CDL player and still help out a lot of teams. I don't know if he's going to get that opportunity, especially with how public in nature his mess up, or alleged mess up, I guess, how public that was. That being said, like, and I think this goes back to the publicity of it, is that HOOK was accused of abusing Adderall as well by Crimsix, if I'm not mistaken, and
well,
it was different.
HOOK came out and he did like that whole video, like explaining when he was and wasn't using Adderall, basically.
Yeah, so that was a weird scenario, and that was also, it coincided with HOOK's one of his low points in his career, and he was kind of having to go to these kind of bottom tier teams or even go to challengers. Like, he started this season in challengers, and I think it's weird. I think it's obviously an open secret that it's not really a secret, but it is. The players themselves keep that secret of who is doing these their performance enhancers in Call of Duty, certainly that they feel like they need to do that to kind of keep up with it, especially like with the cracked kids, they say. So like there is kind of that aspect of it, as well as like he's certainly not the only one allegedly doing this, right? Like, iLLeY was not like the first nor the last player to allegedly do Adderall or do too much Adderall for a CDL match, a LAN match especially. So I mean, obviously bathroom breaks existed nearly a decade ago, and that was, of course, a joke, but certainly like something that kind of played in, and it's been a thing basically since I've been around. I don't know how long it's been where Adderall has been kind of like at the center of like these drug discussions, but it's been a really long time. And I think iLLeY has just been, unfortunately, the one to get punished or to suffer the most from it.
I mean, John would also
Yeah,
have to
allegedly,
be
yeah.
in there. Yes, but yeah, I do think it is. I mean, I just don't know how much it's talked about. Like, if the iLLeY thing didn't happen, there are probably a significant number of newer competitive Call of Duty fans who are just sitting here. If they're listening to this, they're like, "What the hell are these guys talking about?" Like, it really
You had to
feels
be
like
there.
it was definitely a very hot topic uh, a decade ago, like you said, and I do feel like we have not really heard as much about it as we did, in previous years, especially of late, outside of this iLLeY incident and the Hook video for, I can't even remember when that was now. It might have been 2 years ago now. But regardless, those
2 or
feel like
3.
the two primary incidents of late that where it's like even been a topic. But outside of that, I feel like it's just not as big of a conversation in the Call of Duty scene now. And obviously, from the CDL's perspective, that's like, you know, they want it to be that way. They don't want this to even be
Oh,
uh, discussed and to quote unquote tarnish or potentially diminish the value of their product that is the CDL.
yeah,
Um,
certainly.
but yeah, we could go on for days talking about this. End of the day, I think there are a lot of people who would like to see iLLeY return to the CDL,
Hmm.
whether it was this year or at any point in the future. And there are a lot of OpTic fans, especially given the state of the team earlier this season, depending on when this um, potential iLLeY return to OpTic was being considered. I think there were a lot of OpTic fans, or there would have been a lot of OpTic fans who would have been on board for it. And it would have been another case of potentially like the same thing. I mean, for yeah, with hindsight in mind, not to say like I think if I had to compare iLLeY and Skyz, I would say I think iLLeY is a better search and destroy player than Skyz, but I don't think the difference is that big, especially in recent years. I just remember in MW2, Skyz, the stat was like he was the quote unquote most clutch player, and
Yeah.
he won like over 90% of his 1v1 situations. Or that 90% number is made up in my mind. I don't remember the exact number, but it was definitely said on stream like how many scenarios he was in. And for lack of the exact specifics, Skyz was a very clutch player, specifically in MW2. But over these last couple of years, he's been a pretty good surge player. So, you could, look at the Skyz iterations of OpTic and be like, is this possibly what would have happened if iLLeY um, was on the team? Because I feel like that's sort of like there were hard points where Skyz wasn't dropping huge numbers, but he was playing decent in the searches. That's really like you said at this point that's what you kind of expect from iLLeY. You don't expect him to drop a 1.5 KD in the respawns, but you expect him to drop double digit kills in the search or be pretty close to it. So we went off on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah, I do. End of the day, hopefully we see iLLeY return to the CDL. Who knows? Maybe I think a good way to wrap it up here. We mentioned it multiple times. We were talking about Hastro getting the NV brand and the Dallas Empire back. Those brands back. If NV or Empire is back in COD next year, specifically the CDL2, maybe that's iLLeY's route to a CDL return.
Yeah, I believe that might be the way back for him. Next up, the last thing before we talk about some of these matches or kind of fly through the matches, the the timeline has not been kind to the current state of the CDL. At any point, I think that could be an evergreen statement right there. But really, this most recent uh, complaint, I guess, is stemming from a few players, but mostly LAT as well as Slasher, a former LAT player as well. Slasher, he tweeted, and this started a pretty interesting thread of tweets. He said, "I think it's time to just cut control completely. They have not been able to make it work, and it just gets worse and worse." Ghosty said, kind of alluding to Slasher being the
Slasher World
commissioner.
League.
Yeah, the Slasher World League coming back. Slasher said, "I should actually be the commissioner. These map changes this year are from someone throwing darts at a board, and control is chalked. Veto advantage picks, extra AP or S&D is best I got at the moment. Haven't thought about it much." And then I think what was really one of the more interesting tweets, because it actually lended some insight into what is actually happening behind the scenes. Envoy said, "Couple days practice on new patch, now going back to old patch, which was said to be impossible for years, only because Codcaster is bugged for the stream, not a serious esport." I don't know if fines are still in order for the CDL, but fines all around for these gentlemen, if they are. Maybe not Ghosty, because that's kind of an innocuous tweet, but just for kind of throwing the alley-oop to Slasher for his tweet might just be like half of a fine on Ghosty's behalf. But, I think in general, this is a very interesting topic. We even talked about it a little bit, I think, on the last episode or maybe 2 episodes ago, about how the CDL had been playing on the old patch, because actually this might have been a few episodes ago now. They're playing on the old patch because of like the midseason update and all that stuff. Like the timing of the updates didn't really align well with the CDL schedule. No surprise there. But now we're hearing that they went back to the new patch. It looks to be about for 5 days, which is what Envoy said in another tweet to Kleenex. So they were on the new patch for 5 days and then reverted to the old patch, according to Envoy, allegedly, purportedly, whatever, that it's because of Codcaster being bugged. So it would have something to do with the broadcast, not the actual game that the players are playing. What do you think about all this drama? Obviously, CDL players are not hesitant to criticize the league. What do you think about all this?
So as far as my understanding of the situation goes, which again, this is the least amount of Call of Duty I have played in a very, possibly ever in my life.
You say this literally
over the
every
last
single
couple
year,
months.
and it's true every single
No,
year.
but this is like by far even like earlier last, after release, I played a lot of zombies. I haven't played any ranked play in Black Ops 6, but so I haven't even played multiplayer since maybe November. Um but the what I heard from Karma, I believe, on the Scump watch party, um or it was actually before this, is it was on the Scump Watch Party, I believe, though, and they were saying that they were not playing the Major 3 qualifiers or Major 3 on the Season 3 patch for Black Ops 6 because of when that happened. We talked about that at that time because there were apparently some Jackal nerfs. So we were waiting for this patch, and then I believe it would have been, I know Karma said it, so it would have been at the Major 3 watch party on Scum stream. Karma said that they were still playing on the old patch for the first week of Major 4. I don't think he said it directly, but it lines up with the Season 3 Reloaded mid-Season 3 update for Black Ops 6 just came out, I think, at the end of April, which is, from the CDL's perspective, they must have been thinking like, okay, so we could just go to that new patch, and then we're good from there. So it's apparently they were, at least from my understanding, they were trying to play on this newest update for COD, and anybody who knows anything about COD updates is there are always issues, there are always bugs. Oftentimes the servers go down for a non insignificant amount of time, and yeah, so it's not surprising that if that's what's happening here, is that they're trying to play on the newest update, And it's just I think there's been the talk of the thing with control, I believe, has been like spawn issues, um, which is interesting because I feel like that's, control is at least side based. So you feel like a mode like hardpoint where there's more like, there's multiple points people can spawn. It's not like, split in an offense defense. You would feel like maybe there would be more issues with spawns in hardpoint as compared to control, but again, not entirely sure what the specifics are with this. But nonetheless, yeah, it seems like there's some issues. So we'll have to see if that plays into, if that is a factor for the rest of the season. The other thing that was being discussed by the community, I believe, was the season 3 reloaded map Haven. Was apparently like a map that was being designed for MW3, and like it got cut and then um was used in this game, and it was apparently being designed as a potential competitive map for MW3, and that led people to think maybe it would be used as a late season addition to the map pool for this year. But instead, we have Rewind Hardpoint returned this past week, and Protocol Hardpoint was removed. That came on April 29th, I believe, because that was also when I was driving. Is that when that was announced? Yep, April 29th, 4 p.m. So Protocol Hardpoint's out, Rewind Hardpoint's in. That seemingly, they were able to make that map change without the patch impacting that. So that's, worth noting. But yeah, we'll have to see what's going on with the updates. I do think I saw something about Parasite tweeting about the attachments and rank play and stuff, and saying people were using the C9 SMG, which is basically like the MP5 in this game. So maybe we see a slight meta change if this patch goes live and the nerfs to the Jackal go through. But it sounded like, based on like that interaction you said, like Kleenex and Envoy, they were talking about the SMG attachment. So I don't think the Jackal is going anywhere. But long story short, well, most likely maybe they'll talk about this on broadcast, but more than likely not. We'll have to hear about it secondhand information from like the pros and whatnot on Twitter, and we'll have to see what's going on with the patch and whatnot. But if we see any funky spawns this weekend, then it might mean that they're playing on the new patch. But if we don't see the complaints, then they're more likely on the previous one.
I was looking it up while you were talking. Why can't the CDL and these developers get on the same page? It's not even like the developers, like it is the developers, but it's also like the marketing team, which the CDL is a marketing tool. I don't get that. Like, how is there so much confusion about this kind of stuff? Because I was looking at it and I was like, all right, so season 1 of Black Ops 6 started November 14th, ends January 27th. Why couldn't, the CDL align with that, where, Major 1 ends on like January 24th or something, and then or I think because there's 2.5 months, you should probably do 2 events per season. So like, like a midway event, which would be the minor, and then you have the major, and then you go to the next season. You give the players in the teams like a week or so, maybe even 2 weeks to kind of get their bearings, see what's new in this new season, because there should be weapon tuning in that. And then they play another 2 events in that season, and so on and so forth. There are 6 seasons per year or per game. I don't think season 6 is probably doable for a lot of reasons, because there needs to be some kind of off season, right, for the CDL players. But like, if you aligned it 5 seasons in a game, 2 events per season, that's 10 events. There will not be that many complaints. There will be complaints. I cannot guarantee that no one will complain about this, but 10 events per season, or per CDL season per year, I think would be perfect for this. They could also align it so it's not a bunch of people complaining about things we get to see new maps involved and new weapons involved. I am just kind of like fan theorizing now because there's no way any of that happens. If anything, the seasons are going to completely overrun the actual CDL events and stuff. So, I was just kind of talking out of my ass there, but that it just makes too much sense, I think, for the CDL and Call of Duty at large to get on the same page. Shout out Aiden Dixon and Ethan Dietzer in the chat.
I think that brings us to another topic which we could talk about for a very long time, in terms of just the apparent lack of caring for that merger or relationship to exist between the competitive scene and the game Call of Duty itself.
Adam Apicella, please save us, please.
I mean, I'll just throw it out there because we're throwing out all these other topics too that we've talked about on previous shows. If we ever get the equivalent of a COD mobile game for the CDL, where it's maps and guns and whatnot for from previous CODs used for the current iteration of CDL gameplay, I think that would be the only world where we have this scenario in which the devs are like fully invested in making sure patch issues and stuff like this doesn't happen for your CDL.
Yeah, we've literally been like, that's been our dream for years now, ever since COD Mobile came out. It's like, why couldn't this have been on like PlayStation 4, or Xbox 360, because Xbox 360 was the best console probably ever. So like, something to give people, I don't know. It's a bummer. I hate thinking about it because I know how great competitive Call of Duty can be, or could be. And it's just like, I'm not going to blame like the people in charge of the CDL, because I think they're just being told what to do, or they're told like, this is the box that you exist in, try to figure it out within this box. Like, we're not going to pour a bunch of money into it. I'm sure they poured a bunch of money at the very beginning because this is pre-esports winter, but then everything that came after that is everything that we've seen over these last 4 to 5 years. And, the pandemic certainly did not help matters at all. But I one last thing before we actually get to the matches, was I've seen a lot of talk about the Challengers scene, because obviously the Challenger season is coming to an end soon. Challengers finals coincides with champs. And there's been just a lot of very well-founded complaints, or criticism, probably better said, about how this Challenger season has went. I don't believe they had a first Challengers Open, so that first major, they didn't have an event. So they've only had, or they will have, 3 Challengers Open events and then Challengers Finals. I saw Encourage. I don't know if you saw this, but Encourage, who is like one of the top Challengers players, he decided to quit this week, or this past week. And he basically said, like, I'm not going to waste my time, basically, when it's so uncertain. And I don't think anyone can blame him. I think there are people that look at that situation and say, well, he's a young guy. I don't even, like, he might be 19, 20 years old, but he hasn't been like Rex, for example. Rex has been at this forever. There have been a lot of players in the Challenger scene that have never gotten that CDL shot, that, they've been working at this for 5 to 10 years, and they might never, ever get that shot. And that sucks. But that is an unfortunate reality, even in the perfect Path to Pro system. The problem is we have a wildly imperfect Path to Pro system, and you could really argue like the way that people actually get to be pro is like kind of irregardless, or regardless of challengers in general. Like, it is a nice thing to have, but I think a lot of it comes down to if players just want to give you a shot. I don't think that there's a lot of like, there's no clear path. Like in the NFL, there's a clear path. You work your way through high school, you work your way through college, and then you go to the NFL draft. There is a very clear pipeline there. And saying it's a little more complicated in other sports like basketball. You could go overseas instead of going to college. You could previously go to the G League Ignite, which was the NBA's kind of path to pro system, and it failed. Like even the NBA commissioner came out and said, yeah, that didn't work out like we were expecting it to. So like there are professional sports leagues that screw this up. But I think when you screw it up and the players themselves and the fans say you screwed it up because you were negligent, I think that's completely different. I think when people think you're not even trying or you are ignoring some of the issues that are going on, then I think that breeds contempt and people have these well-founded criticisms of the challenger scene. And it sucks to see encourage whether he made it to the CDL ever or not. Regardless of that, it was the fact that he didn't feel like there was enough hope or enough of a chance for him to even get to that point at any point, which I think is just pretty, that's pretty crappy considering we used to have an open system where you could pretty much, if you were good enough, you were going to find out, you were going to be pro. Like even just the designation of being pro, which has been debated about forever and ever, but like it really was, you get top 16 at like one of these big events and that makes you a pro. And then that gets you on the radar of these big time teams where you're getting paid a salary, you're actually able to make a living and dedicate your life to it. I'm on a tangent, but I think the idea that a teenager who seemingly has a lot of talent decided to willingly give this up because it's not a solid career path says a lot about how the path to pro system in Call of Duty is in shambles really. And let's talk about these matches. After all these rants, after all these sidebars,
we got there.
Do you want to run through the first week of matches?
Sprinting it.
Yep, let's go.
Sprinting it. Friday, May 2nd, Atlanta versus Vancouver, the banger everyone was anticipating. We talked about it last episode, how Atlanta lost their first match of every qualifier stage, whatever you want to call it, before. We're 0-3 in their opening matches, online qualifiers, before Major 1, Major 2, and Major 3. Major 4, Week 1 here, they beat Vancouver, the team that beat them at Major 3, 3-2, most notably losing both hard points to Vancouver, which we've discussed at points this year. Vancouver being a really good hard point team. Atlanta struggling in hard point, most notably since Major 3. But here, Atlanta pulled off the Neslo, looked strong in the searches, and they weren't going to go 0-1 to start all 4 sets of qualifiers. Then we go into Carolina to versus Toronto, the return of Beans to the lineup, and a little bit of a slow start for him, notably going 15-25 in the map 1 hardpoint. Toronto won regardless. Rex, most notably, went 32-25 in map 1, followed that up with an 11-8 performance in map 2, which Carolina did win 6-5 on dealership, and Kleenex, most notably, had a disgusting 1v3 and dropped 17 kills, which is the new record for S&D this year. There are multiple players who hit 16 before this, but Kleenex dropped 17 and loses for the record, so that's noteworthy. And then after those first 2 maps, Toronto wins the control, and Hacienda Hardpoint take a 3-1 win over Carolina. And Friday ends with the C9 3-0 of Vegas that we discussed already when we were talking about the roster there, highlighted by Capsule going 10-5 in the search. Then we have Vegas versus Minnesota to kick off Saturday, May 3rd's action, where Vegas wins 3-2. Minnesota wins both hard points. Geo drops 40 kills, map 4. Nero and Esriel played really well in a 100-point club, map 1. But Vegas pulls off the Neslo. Again, as we said, another Game 5, Round 11 loss for Minnesota. And this was just a big loss for Minnesota and a big win for OpTic fans. Then we go Carolina versus Boston, the Snoopy versus Slasher matchup. And this time, Carolina wins 3-0. Rex plays pretty well in the respawns again, so that is a good sign for him, especially after his debut where he's had some tough matchups against LA Thieves back to back. So Carolina beats Boston 3-0 there. Then we have the OpTic 3-0 over Vancouver. Already talked about that. And we round out the day on Saturday with Miami versus the Thieves. Miami wins 3-2. Game 5, round 11. Super dropped 16 kills. I believe that's the second time he's dropped 16 kills in his short time in the CDL in search. And I could be wrong on this, but I just know I feel like LA Thieves and Miami have faced off at least a couple times this season on land, and I think they were mostly 3-0s, but Miami got the better of the defending Major 3 champs this time around, so that's interesting. And then we go to Sunday, May 4th, and Miami plays back-to-back games technically, this time against LAG Gentlemates, and they win 3-2 again. LAG wins both hard points. So that is somewhat surprising, just given the state of Gentlemates lately, but Miami just looked too strong in the searches. 6-2 win, red card search map 2, 6-0 win, Hacienda search to take the 3-2 win over Gentlemates there. C9 versus Toronto. Toronto win 3-1. Kleenex continues his superb play so far since the major. 2 standout performances, including 40 kills in the map 1 vault hardpoint. Right behind him, though, Capsule was 39 and 32. So that feeds off of what we were talking about with the C9 roster changes earlier. And then the banger, Atlanta versus LA Thieves, Draza versus Scrap. We both picked against Atlanta just because, of course, LA Thieves defending major champs, and Atlanta 3-0 smoked them. The search was a 6-4. Almost went to a round 11 if Ghosty pulled off a 1v3, but most notably, Cell goes 39 and 17 in map 1, which was 250 to 135 on rewind hardpoint. I think there were some conversations around Rewind Hardpoint when it was announced that was being added to the map pool. I can't remember. I think you talked. No, we didn't talk about it last episode. I think Octane tweeted about it. So regardless, these are 2 teams that know they're in champs. So I'm not surprised to see the newest Hardpoint map played in this series. But regardless, Atlanta getting the 3-0 win over LA Thieves. The defending Major 2 champions are 0-2 in the Major 4 qualifiers so far. And Cell had a 1.95 KD for this series, which is just ludicrous.
Yeah, FaZe is back, and we're all screwed now. Yeah, that map thing literally happened the day after. I remember saying that to you because that we did a Monday Tuesday show, a Sunday Monday show, and I'm pretty sure that dropped Tuesday, the day after we did our second podcast, which was why I was so annoyed that we changed our schedule and then we still get screwed over by the day after news. But yeah, that is the life of the Ego Chall podcast. The standings after week 1 of the Major 4 qualifiers. So we have Toronto, Atlanta, and Miami all at 2-0 at the top of the standings. OpTic Texas is 1-0 in 4th place. C9, Carolina, and the Vegas Falcons all are at 1-1. LAG, Minnesota, and Boston, 8 through 10, are at 0-1. And somehow, someway, at 11th place and 12th place, the Vancouver Surge and the Los Angeles Thieves, who are both 0-2. Just as we all expected. Granted, it won't really affect them too much in the overall standings, but man, that could be a major shakeup, depending on like what happens with the winners bracket and like who. I would hate to be the team that has to like drop down and play like either Vancouver or LAT. That sounds like hell on earth, to be honest, and it's probably going to be like
matches too.
Yeah, I was just saying if they somehow like if there's a tiebreaker and they end up at like 2 and 3 or something, and an OpTic has to drop down and play them. Or...
That's what I was gonna say. Could you imagine just the utter disarray the timeline would be in if OpTic was like in like a 10-point difference with Minnesota or Cloud9 for the champ spot.
Yeah.
They lose first round and then they drop down to losers and play Vancouver or LA Thieves with effectively their champ's life on the line.
Yeah.
Oh boy,
Uh,
that would be chaos.
OpTic plays Atlanta first round in the winners bracket, drops down, plays LAT in the losers bracket round 1. Yeah, I
Oh
think
boy.
the Green Wall would
Oh.
be quite upset by the matter. Minnesota fans would be cooking on the timeline, to be honest. We'll see what happens. Obviously, there are 5 qualifying matches still to be played, or 5 matches in total to be played in these qualifiers for each team. So some of these teams have 4 matches left, some have 3, and then we'll go to the final major of the season, which that's where you can make up the most points. If like I said at the beginning of the show, or like nearly 2 hours ago now, but like you make a big run at Major 4. Those points, like you can make up so much. I think you get 15 just for winning a match, basically, at the major, because you are automatically secured 15 points by getting a top 8 finish, where you get 0 if you finish top 12. So obviously, if you're an OpTic Minnesota or C9 fan, you're hoping for a little bit better, a little more comfortability than just 8th place or whatever. But I think even 8th place, especially for OpTic, could be kind of the clincher if things go right for them down the stretch. The pick'em, as we see it right now, you went 4-6 this past week. I went 5-5. Obviously, there were quite a few upsets this week. So you're 127-73 on the season. I am 130-70, which I looked it up, is 65% win percentage. So you're at 64.8, 64.9, or whatever it is. So I think we're doing pretty good so far. Let's do our pick'em for week 2 of the Major 4 qualifiers, starting on Friday, May 9th. We got the Vegas Falcons and the Miami Heretics. Obviously going to go with Miami, considering they're beating just about everybody now online.
Yeah, I'm taking Miami.
Boston versus OpTic. I'm going with my Boston Breach Boys.
Ooh, I like it. I'm glad you did. It's worth noting last week that I was going to pick Carolina over Boston, thinking you were going to pick Boston in the Snoopy versus Slasher grudge match. And you picked Carolina, so I flipped to Boston, and that just didn't work out for me. This was admittedly both OpTic matches. I left blank before we started the show because I did the notes before. We knew the Mercules situation. Did I just say his name wrong again? I'm so tired.
No, you
Mercules.
got it.
No, I said it right that time. But yeah, regardless, I think I'm gonna go back to my strat of picking against Boston here. I'm excited to see Mercules in action, and he did, I believe, beat Boston with Toronto on land. So technically kind of similar. Basically, his first match with OpTic is almost the same as being a fill-in if you don't think about it too much. So yeah, give me OpTic here.
If OpTic wins, then they'll be 15 points behind the Boston Breach for 7th place. So it could be interesting how things work out there. Atlanta versus C9. C9 fans losing their minds having to play Atlanta, but I'm going with FaZe here.
Yeah, gotta go FaZe.
Saturday, May 10th, Miami versus C9. Miami again.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Miami. Tough draw for C9, especially considering their race for a champ spot. But at least on paper, with these 2 tough matches, you gotta think if Cloud9 is able to pull off an upset in either of these matches, I'd lean towards them potentially doing it against Miami more so than Atlanta, coming off of wins over Vancouver and Thieves. But yeah, I'll still take Miami here.
I don't think we discussed it, but Atlanta starting their qualifiers off strong is kind of scary now, because they went. I think you said they went winless in all of their other qualifier openers. So now they're 2-0.
First, yeah.
So that might be something to watch out for. Minnesota versus LAG. I mean, if Minnesota loses this, then I have no faith that they could ever make champs. But I'll go with the ROKKR.
Yep, I gotta take Minnesota. I picked them too much recently. They owe me here.
And that's why them losing to Vegas was so big, because they could have started these qualifiers out very strong and then kind of faded, but now they really, really need that win. LAT versus Vegas, of course, going with LAT.
Same.
Carolina versus OpTic. I'll go with Carolina.
Ooh, picking OpTic to go too. I guess I'm a green wall supporter this weekend. I'll go OpTic.
I'm just saying, like, they have not. I think I need to be proven that their
Yeah,
win over
no,
Vancouver
I'm with
wasn't.
you. Like I said, I had both of these
Yeah,
matches blank until 10 minutes before the show when I was updating the notes. But like, I do these most of the
yeah,
time after the matches end. But I left both my OpTic matches blank because I feel like they're two matches, especially with the Skyz lineup. I could see Carolina winning. I could see Boston winning those matchups. So now with Mercules in the picture, I guess I'm riding with the green wall for now.
yeah. I just seen too many of these on paper OpTic rosters just not pan out
Yep.
this season.
Yep.
Sunday, May 11th, Boston versus Vancouver. I'm going with Vancouver, but I'm gonna be real scared if Boston wins. I'll be happy for my Breach Boys, but
Yeah,
I
you
will
can take
be.
Boston if you want.
No, I'm good. I'll go Vancouver. But I just think if Vancouver somehow starts this season or starts
Yeah.
this split 0-3, like, and are kind of heading toward the losers bracket, I think that's a really, really bad sign.
Yeah, definitely. Now that I tried to, uh, you know, persuade you to pick Boston, Boston's definitely going to win this one, but I will take
Yeah.
Vancouver here. Um, I just went to check. I believe it was Nasty's tweet. I'm going to read it now because that's the one that I remembered. But 8 hours ago, he tweeted too. This update has broke the game. Crying face. So another one for that update talk. But the tweet I saw from May 3rd after the OpTic match, GG's OpTic, rough weekend from us. I didn't play, I being nasty here, I didn't play up to my standards individually at all. On top of that, we lack the teamwork, which makes us great. Combined is a recipe for disaster. Adjusting back to playing on cable from here doesn't make things any easier. I assume here being Vancouver, but there's no excuses. We made it work before. I'll figure it out and we'll be back. So could be, he mentions the playing on cable or whatever, could be some internet stuff going on for Vancouver. We've highlighted that with Cloud9 and Toronto when it's happened previously this season, so I did want to bring that to light here. But the other thing that stood out to me was we lack the teamwork, which makes us great, and I think that's been the underlying like thing with this Vancouver squad. Even when they had Hicksy in the roster, especially when they had Hicksy in the roster, it felt like it was going to be a team with Rambo as a coach. They were going to be well structured. They were going to play as a unit, get their trades, et cetera, et cetera. You bring in Neptune, and he definitely elevates this team, and he has been a superstar, all-star caliber player, as we mentioned either last episode or two ago. So trying to change that dynamic, but again, at the end of the day, the Vancouver team definitely is a squad that you feel like plays well as a unit when they're firing on all cylinders. And if Nasty was, noticing something different with the teamwork and felt, strongly enough about it to send that tweet mentioning it, that is something I'm going to have my eye on for Vancouver, especially after the O2 start.
Yeah, for sure. LAG versus Atlanta. Do you want to pick LAG? Because I'm not going to pick LAG.
Dude, like now it just brings me back to that Express S&D. That would have been freaking what game was Express back in? I can't even remember. I just remember that was the one where LAG beat Atlanta, and then after that point, Atlanta went on became the best search game. That would have been Cold War, right?
Yeah, Cold War, yeah.
And they literally they got upset by LAG. They lost Express S&D. I can't believe that's still remember that.
That's where Tupac was like, I'm gonna whip these boys into shape.
And you came on the pod wearing your LAG hat. So if anyone's gonna pick LAG here, it's got to be you. So I'll take FaZe.
I'm a LA Gorillas fan, not a LA Gorillas mate fan. So fix that. Toronto versus Minnesota to finish out the week. Minnesota really needs a win. Like it would make up for it huge if they could somehow erase that Vegas loss. I'm gonna go with Toronto, but I mean, I could see Minnesota winning because they have been close to a lot of these wins. It's just it's kind of been like you said, the story of their season. They just come up short when they're needed the most.
I agree. I could see Minnesota pulling something off here. I could also very easily see them winning another Game 5 round 11.
Yeah.
Or I think I said winning. I could very easily see them losing
Yeah, yeah.
another Game 5 round 11. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. So yeah, give me Toronto here.
And that does it for today's show. Obviously, a pretty long one. We're making up for lost time, not being on Sunday, but we should be back to a semi-normal schedule. I do know after Major 4, there's like a 3 or 4 week break before champs, which is quite unusual. I don't know if that's the case every time. I don't feel like maybe 2 weeks, but it feels a little bit longer this season for whatever reason. So we'll try to think of some things. Obviously, we'll preview it kind of in
Yeah.
in parts, but that's a weeks away now. But we will be back on Sunday, May 11th for the live show. If you're just a listener or you watch after the fact, then obviously it will be in your feeds or on YouTube on Monday, May 12th. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening on. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and like I mentioned, YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts if you so please. Again, we'll be back on Sunday, May 11th to talk about all of the matches that we just ran down and whatever happens in between. There will be some major event, I guess, that happens in the CDL on Thursday after we upload this podcast, and we'll probably talk about it on Sunday. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Preston already shouted you guys out, but shout out Blake, Aiden, and Ethan in the YouTube chat for showing love. I did a ton of yapping. We both did to an extent over the last hour and a half. So I'm fried. I'm ready for bed. I don't got much else to say. But yeah, come down to the wire here. 2 more weeks of online Call of Duty, and then we got no more online COD to talk about at least for the foreseeable future, couple months. So, yeah, we'll be back on Monday. Monday is Mother's Day, so shout out all the moms out there. Happy Mother's Day. I guess Mother's Day in the U.S. I think it's different in some other countries. I'm yapping again though, so yeah, gonna shut up. Appreciate all the support. Thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chat.